Hey y'all, it's awesome to be with you for this midweek devotional. I hope you're having a great week. I just want to read today Acts chapter 8, verses 26 to 36. During the message on Sunday, I spoke about the simplicity of the gospel and how we should fight to keep that simplicity. We looked at the letter of Galatians where Paul kind of on and on again tells the early church that Christ plus anything else isn't the gospel. And I want to read a story that I think can help us to avoid overcomplicating the gospel and what does it mean to follow Christ and all that kind of stuff. So I want to read with you this story found in Acts chapter 8, verses 26 to 36, which is about Philip, who meets an Ethiopian. So let's read that. I'm going to read from the NIV version. It should come up behind me, but if you want to read from a different translation, feel free. But let's dive in, and this is what we read. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Go south to the road, the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza." So he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of the Kandake, which means Queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, "Go to the chariot and stay near it." Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. "Do you understand what you are reading?" Philip asked. "How can I," he said, "unless someone explains it to me?" So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Now I want to pause there for a moment because I think we sometimes miss that. Like a eunuch was someone that Jews wouldn't normally hang out with. They wouldn't go and be invited into areas with them. There was a lot of stigma around eunuchs. A lot of people would judge them very harshly. And they're often left alone from relationships, and people wouldn't engage as much. But I kind of love how Philip just listens to God. He just goes. He does what God tells him to do. But let's keep reading to see how the rest of the story goes. This is the passage of scripture the eunuch was reading. "He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth." The eunuch asked Philip, "Tell me, please, who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else?" And then Philip began with that very passage of scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. As they traveled along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here is water. What can stand in the way of my being baptized?" And he gave orders to stop the chariot. Then both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away, and the eunuch did not see him again, but went on his way rejoicing. Philip, however, appeared at Azotus and traveled about, preaching the gospel in all the towns until he reached Caesarea. I love two things. There's so much that we can dive into with that story, but I love two things that really stand out to me. And the first is that Philip kept it simple. In this encounter, Philip already crosses a lot of racial and social barriers stepping into the chariot. But then when he's in there, he keeps it simple. He doesn't overcomplicate it. He meets this eunuch where he's at, with where he's at with God on his journey. and shares with him about Jesus and how Jesus connects with that. He even keeps it simple that when this eunuch's like, hey, here's some water, can I get baptized? He doesn't stop him. He doesn't hesitate. He goes and dives into the water. And so does the eunuch. And this eunuch's baptized. Would we be willing in church nowadays to keep baptism that simple? I mean, I think that's a challenging question to ask ourselves. And I also think the second thing that really stands out to me in this story when we look at, this whole baptism that happens with this eunuch and Philip is that we need to dive into the water. Just like this eunuch stopped the chariot and got out, and Philip got out and they got into the water, we need to do the same with God. Too often we don't want to dive into the water. Whatever God might be calling us to, we overcomplicate it, or we ask all these questions and we just don't step out into the water. But I think if we're able to step out into the water, that's where God's waiting for us. He's waiting for us to step out, not to have all the answers or, a perfect theology or doctrine. He doesn't care about any of that. He cares about the heart. And he wants us to step out. He wants us to step into the water that he might be calling us. Whatever the unknown waters we might be, traveling through or being led to step into, he wants us to step out. God's waiting there for us. And I think if we're able to look at stories like these of the early church and see how Philip was able to keep it simple and dive into the water and just do the next thing God was calling him to do, it makes it easier for us to do our bit to keep the gospel of Christ simple, to not overcomplicate it. I mean, when we unpack the letter of Galatians, we see throughout that letter, Paul's saying the laws, the rules, the obligation isn't going to get you there. It's not going to get you acceptance with God. It's only by Christ, by the grace of Christ. And I pray as a church we're able to keep it simple. We're able to avoid overcomplicating it. And I think it starts with embracing stories like these. Embracing how Philip kept it simple. Embracing how, sometimes we got to step out into the water, into the unknown waters God might be leading us, because that's where God's waiting. Because we see as soon as this baptism's done, this amazing thing happens for Philip, where he's teleported, I guess Star Trek style is how I imagine it, but who knows? He has this amazing divine experience. And that's where God's waiting for us. And I think if our goal is to keep the gospel simple, then we have to start by embracing stories like these and seeing what God might be showing us in these stories. May God's grace and peace be with you.